small crowd today, but hopefully others will catch up with the recording. Let me share my screen here. So as usual, I'll be going through, running through our web tools that we host in the lead division today and talk about some recent updates where applicable. Slides. So just starting out, we've got a little roadmap. I'll go through the tools one by one, give you a brief overview of each one, and then following that, I'll demo the tools themselves. At the end or throughout, I'm willing to take questions, comments, and feedback. And for those watching the recording, feel free to email me with questions, comments, and feedback. All right, so if you are looking for our lead web tools, you'll find them at lead.jbei.org. That is our landing page and the entry point for all of the tools that we develop and maintain. So we'll be going there in just a minute. But first, I just want to blitz through a glimpse at each of the tools that you'll find on that page. So first of all, we've got the Biociding tool, which is this interactive mapping platform. If you've ever used Google Maps, it'll feel very familiar to that. But this is specific to mapping out biomass resources across the United States, both in terms of resource availability, so things like feedstock amounts for different types of biomass feedstock, and actually other potential feedstocks such as municipal solid wastes, manure. It spans beyond just biomass as we think about it typically at JBEI. And then we also map out different facilities that exist for processing those different resources. So things like wastewater treatment facilities, waste to energy anaerobic digesters, different types of combustion plants for taking woody biomass or lignocellulosic biomass and converting that into biofuels and bioproducts. That's all mapped out as well. So some key use cases you might find applicable to the Biociding tool would be exploring where biomass resources exist in the country and using that to inform siting of new facilities that don't currently exist. And part of that could be looking at where facilities already are and where there might be resource richness and a gap in those facilities to figure out an optimal location for putting a new one in place. And then estimating what kinds of feedstock blends and quantities you could expect from different parts of the country. And we offer projected data sets out into the future for these different feedstocks. And so if you wanted to run a scenario analysis for a given future year under different assumptions, economic and agronomic, you could do that with our tool, and it would give you kind of a rough approximation of what the landscape of biomass looks like at that future time point.
Tyler, while we're here on that third bullet point, so just a clarification, what do you mean exactly by facility upgrading?
Right, so we've got a lot of facilities across the country already, like bioethanol plants, for example, and some of those plants could be upgraded to accept different types of feedstock than they were originally designed for and currently accept. So say a plant only accepts like corn stover right now. There are technologies that could be installed to have it accept sorghum or sorghum stubble or other residues that require different processing techniques. And so as opposed to building a sorghum specific plant alongside that corn specific plant, you could consider making retrofits or upgrades to that plant to make it more versatile. So that's what we talk about when we refer to upgrading.
So if I'm just trying to think of kind of like business use cases for these capabilities. So who is going to be the one that's going to be using the tool to identify about facility upgrades? Is it going to be people that have existing facilities? Is it going to be the companies that would actually be doing the upgrading and they need to have like targeted marketing, or like who's going to be using that information?
I would presume it would mainly be owners of existing facilities, or companies that run existing facilities and might want to, you know, get more value add for their facility. And they, might be considering building new facilities, but weighing that against just upgrading the ones they already have at the lower capital expenditure up front. So I think in certain scenarios, it's advantageous to consider that upgrading option, from a cost benefit analysis. And in others, and certain scenarios, the costs of upgrades can be so immense that it just makes more sense to put up a new facility that specializes in the new technology you're trying to install, essentially. So we honestly haven't gotten a lot of commercial feedback, from those users, on whether they're actually making use of this and for what purposes in particular. But that's the intent, at least as far as I'm aware.
Because I'm wondering, as we go to more and more of the distributed bioeconomy, there's going to be more and more compelling reasons to upgrade a facility. Because maybe now you want to make your plant more adaptable to, as you were mentioning, maybe sorghum versus just corn, or maybe make different products. So there can be increased need for this going forward. And thinking of this, the business model, I think recently, just some person came by our house and basically offered to do like a free assessment for solar. So we don't have solar right now, but they basically said, hey, we'll basically come out and estimate like, how much like sun does this location get and where are the trees and all those types of things. And presumably if they're doing that for free, that means that if they do that and they demonstrate to the homeowner that they would actually be, saving a lot by going with solar, then maybe that customer is more likely to go with solar, and maybe directly or indirectly that would give them more business to install the solar panels. So I'm just wondering if there's like a business opportunity where if you had the list of all of the current existing biorefineries and you kind of knew through your models what upgrades you could do and what type of an economic impact that would make, you could basically, go out to that biorefinery or contact them through email or phone and say, hey, I've done this analysis. It looks like you could be making another $2 million a year if you basically put in this $500,000, upgrade, and I'm happy to sell you the upgrade. By the way, so I'm just wondering, like, is there kind of like a business, like if you could somehow use this business to do some targeted, marketing of certain types of upgrades. So I don't know like who in the industry actually makes the upgrades or installs the upgrades, but I imagine that this would be a great thing for their business development if you could actually tell them like, here's the talking points, like here's like the playbook, the script that you should be reading when you're talking with this biorefinery guy, like this is how you can make the sale. Anyways, just an idea. The other question or idea that I have, I think I ask you this every single time, and maybe I ask you the same question in slightly different ways at least, but do you know what is the roughness or steepness of these siting suggestions? So I think I definitely have mentioned this in the past, but if like I'm a real estate prospector and I want to buy all of the best biorefinery sites across the US, which I believe are kind of undervalued right now, but in 20 years when the bioeconomy kicks in, they're going to be pretty valuable. Is the property like, is biociding like, okay, as long as you put it within like this square 2 miles, is it all equivalent, or like does it really drop off pretty quickly, or like how much land would I have to buy to block out somebody else?
Yeah. So when you refer to citing recommendations, that's currently beyond the capabilities of the tool. as it stands. We don't recommend like optimal locations right now because we don't have the optimization algorithms in place to do so. But all of the siting analysis is encapsulated in this feature where you can place a pin at a location and run an inventory analysis of the resources within a given radius of that site. So um, I don't think I'm exactly answering your question because I don't think the tool offers the capability to do exactly what you're describing. Um, I mean, presumably you could place a certain number of points in a given area, like 10 by 10 kilometer grid square, and pull the data for each of those points, download it, and do a one-off analysis to figure out which one will be optimal given your constraints as a potential builder. But we don't have that level of optimization built in at this point.
And then, I mean, I guess this might not be a question that I've asked before, but this data either now or could it be kind of climate forecasting sensitive? So here's the siting data that we have now, but here's how we project the resources is going to be different like in 20 years.
Yeah, so we already have some of that built in because we are using billion ton study projections for future years. So the billion ton study, which was most recently updated in 2016. So granted, that's already what, 7 years old, or 6 years old. We have data that's projected out until 2040 from their model, and they use a pretty rigorous economic and climate based model for making these future projections of how much crops are expected in different parts of the country, and based on that deriving how much of different crop residues, which would primarily be the feedstock for biofuels, would be available. So under the hood, there is some climate projections being accounted for in these future years. Now, like I said, because the billion ton projections and models might be a little bit behind the most up to date climate models, it might not be the most accurate, but as far as I know, there's not an update to the billion ton model infrastructure that's been very recent. So we're kind of constrained by that, and short of doing a lot of in-house projection modeling, which I imagine would be quite time intensive to achieve similar predictions that billion ton already offers kind of packaged up. We don't have that capability at this point.
Okay, well, thanks for entertaining these questions. If I had $1 trillion, I think I would start up a lot of businesses and try to somehow figure out how to take advantage of this data that you have that maybe other people aren't trying to use. But yeah, thanks for entertaining the questions.
For sure. All right. Was my screen share showing the demo
Yeah,
just then?
it
Okay.
looks good. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I was a little confused because I didn't see the green box surrounding the screen as I usually do, but I'm glad it worked. All right, so that basically covers biociding. I kind of ran through these key features one way or another. The last part to this that I'll mention, and it's a segue into the next tool, is that when you put down a pin for a site location, you can jump straight into a techno-economic and life cycle analysis of that location that's geographically specific, meaning it accounts for the amount and types of biomass available at that point. So let me go back to the tool and demo that real quick. So if you're at this site and you're thinking it looks pretty good because you're in a pretty resource rich area and all these types of biomass, which you can actually zoom into, explore more deeply. If you think that looks good, you can jump into your TEA LCA analysis from here by clicking on this button down in the right hand side, and you have another option to filter in or out the types of acceptable feedstock that your plant would take, and it'll only show you feedstocks that actually are available within your buffer region. So if there were other types of feedstock available here, you'd see other checkboxes, but in this case we only have corn stover miscanthus apparently. That might have to do with which year we've chosen, but anyway, you get the option of choosing which biofuel or bioproduct you want to model, and then going straight into a TEA LCA, and it actually automatically runs it for you and sources a lot of these input parameters that you'd otherwise have to rely on defaults for or input yourself. But like I said, these are spatially explicit to the location on the map that you're coming from. And you get this nice analysis of your costs. So that's the TEA, Techno-economic analysis side. And then if you wanted to evaluate the environmental footprint, that would be, greenhouse gas emissions model here, or either of these water footprint models, water consumption or water withdrawal. So between the water and the greenhouse gases, those give you a full picture of, or most of a picture of your environmental impact.
And Tyler, one other idea that you're probably never going to get the chance to implement, even if you liked it or wanted to, but just to get it out there, the Biden administration, I think, has been very good about concepts like energy justice, social justice. So I'm wondering, in the biociding tool, in addition to kind of like resources available and other types of things, if there would be kind of economic regions, there could maybe even be like tax incentives or policy incentives to put a plant somewhere in like a historically kind of like, under developed community. Is there, I'm just imagining it's a different data modality, just kind of like acceptable feedstocks. I mean, there could be other data layers with like, economic types of things.
Yeah, actually, that's a really good point and very timely, because we are actually planning to implement something just like that fairly soon, actually, because there are some very expansive EJ, environmental justice data sets, like down to the census tract level, that could pretty easily be slotted into this map. And so when you put down a siting location, for instance, instead of just getting this little pop-up that shows your lat and your longitude, we would like to also give, some basic summary stats about the census tract that you're in, and whether that tract has certain EJ sort of qualifications that meet those standards, which would incentivize building certain plants in that area, and potentially just other general census statistics about demographics, population makeup, that sort of thing, which all kind of factor into the EJ consideration. So we definitely have our sights set on doing more of that, and making this encompassing of environmental justice angles as well.
I'm really happy to hear that. That's really great.
Yeah. So that's definitely coming soon. Be on the lookout for it, and hopefully by the next time I'm giving one of these user meetings, we'll have some of that built into the tool. All right, so let me jump back to my slides here. I was not share. I was those two buttons up. I made the jump into our TEA LCA tool, which seamlessly integrates with biociding at this point. So that's nice. And like I mentioned, the TEA is for the cost estimation side and gives you the minimum selling price that you basically need to market your fuel or product at in order to break even for a facility. And then the LCA gives you the greenhouse gas and water footprints, the pathway. And a couple other features of the TEA LCA tool are that you can download some pretty extensive documentation of the model and assumptions that went into the model. So, for example, if you wanted to download this documentation as a PDF, you get this pretty thorough document which outlines all of the methodology we used in the life cycle inventory and the life cycle assessment, all of the assumed values for greenhouse gas emission equivalents and the upstream inputs to the various parts of the production process. So all these raw materials and their corresponding impact factors are what we call them. So basically the multipliers you use against, you multiply against the amounts used to get greenhouse gas emissions values for. So this is a long document that gets into the weeds of all of that and our references for those assumptions. So just to make it as easy as possible for researchers who want to run our analysis or run an analysis using our tool and be able to potentially cite it in a publication or something, they could get more details that way, as well as downloading the raw data that underlies these visualizations. They can access it as a CSV, or they can save their analysis in the web tool. And then what happens when you do that is basically stores your model run in this built-in library that's tied to your account. So one thing I forgot to mention earlier on is you actually need an account to use these tools, and that comes with the benefit of your ability to save analyses and return to those because it's all tied up in your account. So while it might seem like an obstacle for getting users to initially get access to the tool, it's totally free to make an account. It's pretty easy, and once you do, you get this nice feature of saving analyses. So that's a pretty good summary of the TEA LCA tool. Moving on here, the next tool we offer on our site is the separations strategy tool. And this one is an offshoot of the TEA LCA tool in the sense that separation and recovery systems are a component of any of the production pathways that we feature in the TEA LCA tool. So what we've done here is just made a more detailed interface for addressing the separation and recovery process itself, because there's a lot more variability that can go into those systems, depending on a lot of things, but mainly specifications of your product and the microbial host that you're using to accumulate the product. And we wanted to make this module standalone to be a little more generalizable too, so that users who had a particular end product in mind and mainly are just at a point of trying to optimize the separation and recovery step in their pipeline and provide, the custom data or custom specs for their product and actually run the algorithm behind this tool to get a recommendation for equipment and separations, equipment and scaling for their separations system. So if you had all this information that the algorithm requires to run its decision tree and recommendation engine, then you could get a nice recommended system out of it. For now, I'll just show you what it looks like when you run for a built-in product such as ethanol, where all of the defaults are filled out for you. You ask it to find a separation strategy. It will think and then give you this flowchart of the equipment units in sequence that you would want, or one version of a system that would work for you and based on our algorithm would suit your needs. And along with that equipment, you would get estimates of the installed cost, the capital expenditure, and then the operating costs broken down by each equipment unit. So it's a nice overview of the cost side of things, and then we actually do a cash flow analysis to give you an idea of your minimum selling price. Here is a little misleading because it's just the separation system, so it really should say minimum separations price, because this would be embedded within a larger system that involved all the upstream steps to get to your recovery and separation process, and you'd want to account for those in your ultimate cash flow analysis. But like before, you can download this data into a CSV or also save this analysis into your library of analyses, your user account. So that's the separations and recovery tool. And just like to acknowledge Minliang Yang, a member of our research group who's been instrumental to actually developing the algorithm behind this tool. And what I've done has mainly just been putting a user interface over the work that she's really done extensively. Whoa, slide got a little messed up. Sorry about that. Let's see here. So the next part of our website is the Techno-economic model repository. So going back to our homepage here, we have this library of techno-economic models in their original form. So by original form, I mean in SuperPro Designer flowsheet files, because many of, or practically all of the models that are featured in our LCA tool and kind of that on-the-fly lightweight version have a predecessor form in these more detailed simulation models that were developed with SuperPro, which is commercial software that does a really good job of like detailed simulation process modeling, but it's just not quite flexible and lightweight enough to host those simulation models in a web format for on-the-fly predictions. So the next best thing we offer in terms of sharing these models is to enable you to download their SuperPro files. And then if you have SuperPro on your own machine, you can load them up and run them locally. And we offer a lot of metadata to accompany those files, as well as links to the publications where those processes, or I should say those processes are documented. So we've done that for every SuperPro model developed in our group over the last several decades that we've been building these models essentially. So this is less interactive, more of just a library of past work. And lastly, we've got this Feedstocks to functions tool, which is work that we've partially done at JBEI and partially done with collaborators at Oregon State University. And essentially, we've put together a database of molecules, many of which can be derived from bio-based feedstocks, and included their properties, mainly combustion properties, so things like their cetane number and flash point, as well as some other general properties like melting point and boiling point, those sorts of things. And where possible, we've included all the empirical data points for those properties, but we've also developed some machine learning models to predict those properties where we don't have good empirical or any empirical data for that matter. So it's useful for exploring what molecules and properties might be out there, as well as considering potential blends between fuels. And if you say wanted to look at what properties you might expect from a blend of two fuels in different proportions, that's where this tool would really shine, because short of doing those bench experiments, there wouldn't be a great way to estimate those properties. So I'll show you what this tool looks like. Give you a sense of some of its features. So down at the bottom here, the Feedstocks functions tool. And this tool is was developed to be a standalone thing, so it's not quite as seamlessly integrated into our lead ecosystem as the other tools are. It's really got kind of its own website, essentially. But if you go up to the Molecule Explorer tab here, this is the real interface for searching the database of existing compounds. And you can search by a variety of different methods here. If you know the SMILES string for your molecule, or the IUPAC code, or the INCHL key formula, you can input any of those. Easiest though would be just searching by molecular name. So for a simple case, we can search for ethanol, and in our results table, it'll bring up the closest result as well as the next few closest results, just like a Google search would. This is the ethanol we're looking for. And when you go to the detail page for one of these chemicals, you get this nice little interactive 3D molecular model, which is kind of fun, as well as all of the properties of the data, identifiers as well as properties, so SMILES and synonyms for the molecular name, the molecular formula, and any of these other things you could have searched for to pull up ethanol. And then down below is where we present the property data. In the case of ethanol, well-studied molecule, so we actually have experimental data in many cases from multiple sources here for all of these properties that would be of interest. But in addition to that, we offer our predicted properties based on the machine learning models that were trained on all of our compounds for which experimental data was found. So essentially here, when you have the option of looking at experimental data versus predicted data, always best to go with what's been experimentally measured, and that's why we've put the predicted properties down below and tried to indicate as much as possible with italics and gray font and this red disclaimer that these are just predictions and should be taken with a grain of salt. Obviously these predictions would be more useful for certain compounds, and there are many in our database where we don't have good experimental data. But if given the choice, it's always good to fall back on the experimental values. And for some of these models, or sorry, some of these molecules, such as ethanol, we actually link right back to our LCA tool for you to analyze the costs and emissions. So that's a nice backlink to one of the other features of our lead ecosystem of tools. that's built right into the Feedstocks to functions interface. And like before, you can always download your results in raw CSV format. So that's kind of the search interface. The blend interface is still under development, so we haven't actually made this available to the public quite yet, but it'll be coming soon, hopefully, and give you some of that capability that I described about choosing, between choosing two different fuel molecules and defining how much of each one you want to blend in proportion with the other, and then using the machine learning models to predict properties of that blend. So that's the plan there.
Does the blending tool give you reaction conditions? If you were processing, like how you would change your process compared to just single feedstocks, or
No,
my
yeah, it doesn't quite go that far back upstream in the production process. It just takes for granted the known properties of a product. Say, let's say you were blending ethanol with limonene. It takes the known properties of ethanol and it takes the known properties of limonene as combustible fuels, and then through the algorithm predicts what a blend of those two, how it would behave.
Oh, got it.
In terms of like flash point, boiling point, and other properties. Yeah, I think it would be more involved to take into consideration the different production parameters. But presumably you could, I'm trying to think if you could use our other separations tool, like if you wanted to alter the way the product was produced and namely separated and covered, that might, at the end of the day, the product is the product, right? So a given compound is going to have given combustion properties regardless of how it was produced. So I think in terms of the scope of this tool, we are really only concerned with the combustion side of things, and really the behavior of the molecule under different like combustion or chemical scenarios, chemistry scenarios. So that is a wrap on the Feedstocks to functions tool, and I believe that covers all the tools on our site. So at this point, I'm happy to take any questions or comments for folks on the call.
Yeah, thanks, Tyler. I think I asked the questions I had along the way. Josh, did you have any other questions?
Not at this point. Trying to think. So for the predicted values of the chemicals and the feedstock to, yeah. So when you have predictions for a chemical, are those already stored, or do you make predictions in real time?
That's a good question. So for molecules that are in our database, we have made predictions and stored those already, and then we just present the stored data.
Got it.
But the tool does enable you to search by smiles, and if you put in like a smiles, I don't know if this is going to be valid, but if you put in a valid smiles that corresponds to a molecule that we don't have, it will theoretically, it'll come up with predictions on the fly. So as you can see here, this molecule, I have no idea what this molecule is, but doesn't have any experimental data. So we've used our algorithms to make these on-the-fly predictions of its properties. And that's why it actually took a little longer in the search engine, because part of what was happening behind the scenes was making the predictions would take several seconds. And
Right.
so, yeah, it's kind of to answer your question, it's a little bit of both. We are presenting pre-computed data as well as offering the on-the-fly predictions for compounds that we don't have that pre-computed data for.
Very cool.
Okay, Tyler. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to mention we offer these lower and upper error bounds, and as you'll see, some of them are quite large. So whenever you're taking a prediction, it's good to evaluate that in the context of your error bounds. And because some of our ML models are fairly coarse and don't have super great accuracy, I would definitely advise anyone not just to look at the predicted value, but also to look at the range and report the range in any kind of reporting that was done with this data. So that's the last I'll say, just to as a little disclaimer there.
Well, Tyler, thanks for presenting again today. If you want to send me any slides, I can get those up with the recording. But I think that's good for today. I'll go ahead and stop recording then.